So in my previous session, I talked about the Rishi, the seer of the next mantra, which we haven't pronounced yet, we haven't studied yet. We are still in a preparatory stage, preparing to address the next 3 mantras, all of which belong to the Rig Veda, the most ancient sections of the Vedas. The Maharshi, the seer of the next mantra, not all the 3, but the next one, I gave his name the last time to you, Mahidasa Aitareya. Mahidasa, which means the son of Mother Earth, and Aitareya means the son of, Mahidasa means the servant of Mother Earth, and Aitareya means the son of Itara. I told whatever little bit we know, and some scholars have guessed about his personal identity, but most important are his teachings, and I gave 2 reasons why I like him very much. Is he comes from a very humble background. Thanks to this wisdom and insight, he's raised on a very high pedestal of respect, despite his humble background. And most likely his teachings, the most important 2 things that I mentioned about his teachings in my previous session was that he seems to be, at least in the known and recorded history, the first person to ask this fundamental question, the answer to which we all take for granted: who am I? Takes a whole inner journey of exploration. He didn't have the Aitareya Upanishad to find an answer, because that is what his teachings have become. So he had to take an internal meditative journey and comes across the answer that this consciousness within me is the subtlemost and the highest principle. So he reaches with his understanding on the deepest level of consciousness. And that's why he is the master who pronounces what is seen as the quintessential sentences, the great sentence. And these great sentences are not great sentences in words. They are usually just, there are 4 great sentences, because there are 4 Vedas. And all these 4 great sentences have just 2 or 3 little words. For example, his quintessential sentence is, consciousness is supreme. And even is we add in English. In Sanskrit it is just consciousness supreme. That's all. And this is seen as the sentence of definition. Then comes the sentence of teaching, which is the famous quintessential sentence from the Samaveda, which we often come across in exploring the mystical teachings of India. You are that this has the tone of a teaching. A teacher, and in the context, Maharshi Uddalaka is saying it to his beloved son, Shvetaketu, you are that. Just 3 words. Then comes the meditative quintessential sentence. After the student has heard this, he meditates on that. That this consciousness within me is supreme. Again, just 3 words in Sanskrit. And then eventually comes the realization sentence from the Yajurveda, which is the quintessential sentence that expresses realization. I am that supreme essence. So like these are the 4 quintessential sentences. Each one of them expresses the same truth, which is foundational to yoga, to union, to oneness. Because yoga means union. Union of what? Union of the individual with the universal. The realization of the oneness of the individual with the universal. But each one of these sentences has slightly a different tone to it. So, Maharshi Aitareya provides us the quintessential sentence which defines, which provides the definition of Brahman, of the supreme principle, which is nothing but consciousness. Now today, I'm going to carry you a little into the beautiful world of what are known as the Aranyakas. They are the 3rd section of the Vedas, and they are specifically the sections which are about meditative practices. Specifically, no rituals, but meditative practices. And if at all, then internal rituals. I personally find the world of the Aranyakas deeply enchanting and fascinating. A fascinating world of meditation that gives me techniques to explore myself, within myself, independently from anything external. In them we really get the glimpse of the extremely ancient meditative techniques in which lie the seeds of yoga. Yoga, which means meditation. Always remember, yoga means meditation. When we look at the Aranyaka sections, we are really like approaching Gomukha. Gomukha is the place where Ganga comes out of the glacier, where she becomes manifest for the first time. This doesn't mean that Ganga isn't flowing before Gomukha. She has her origin even further up, but to us, she becomes visible for the first time in Gomukha. And it's a perilous and a very difficult journey if one travels up to Gangotri, even today, where cars can take us up to beyond that 14 kilometers. The journey is an on-foot journey. When I did it in 1999 with my father, there were sections where stones were constantly falling down from above. So you had to walk through and always be mindful that maybe suddenly a stone is coming from up. So they're extremely perilous stretches. And yet when you reach there after walking for 14 kilometers in those dangerous terrain of the higher Himalayas, it is an enchanting experience, which I wonder anyone who reaches there one day, maybe if roads are constructed till up there, or reaches there with a helicopter, can experience that sense of mystery and enchantment and fascination which we could feel when we were there. Just to be there, to be at the very origin. So somehow the Aranyaka sections are, because of their extremely ancient language, and it's not easy, one has to prepare a lot to explore them. But today I will try to give you a glimpse of these sections, because these were most likely the practices that those people went through who were sought after even by Alexander the Great when he came to India in the 3rd century BC, and he had heard about the gymnosophists. And it was, even for him, it was difficult to find them, and when he found them, to actually approach them, to be able to talk to them, because they were those who did not, who first of all, ancient Vedic rishis did not like associating with kings and with power. They were living in the forests, Aranyakas. In fact, the section Aranyaka means a section that contains wisdom that has been discovered in the forests and should only be taught when somebody is ready to come into those forests. This didn't mean that they hated the kings, but simply they did not associate with them. They were not running behind that power of center. And if kings used to approach them, they had to approach them after abandoning all their insignia of power and violence. So for example, what you find in a very world-famous text of Sanskrit literature, Abhidhyana Shakuntalam, it's the greatest work of Sanskrit literature, for which Kalidasa is considered the Shakespeare of India. What we find, it's the love story between Shakuntala and King Dushyanta. What we find is that when King Dushyanta approaches the ashrama, the hermitage of Maharshi Kanva, he was hunting. He was on a hunting expedition. But then while running behind a deer, that deer went into the ashram seeking protection. And he realized that now an ashram is nearby, so he stopped his hunting expedition, left his chariot and everything, all his arms, everything, few kilometers from a distance where he could see the smoke rising out of the fire pit of the Maharshi. From that distance, the moment he saw, oh, here in the forest is an ashrama of Maharshi, most likely the ashrama of Maharshi Kanva. Now beyond this region, no violence is permitted. So I have to give up my insignia, and it is with total devotion then, with respect, after leaving all his kingly insignia, that he enters the ashrama. So this was the way to approach those ancient rishis. If a king wanted to approach them, they would never come to them. And this is precisely the difficulty that Alexander the Great had in approaching these gymnosophists. They did not want to associate with him. First of all, somebody who had killed thousands and thousands of people at battlefield, and these people who live on fruits that fall to the ground naturally so that they don't inflict suffering on a tree. So they eat only what a tree naturally gives them. Don't eat honey, because that is a definition of a muni. That is the lifestyle of a muni, like Patanjali. And so how would you expect them to associate with someone who had so much blood on his hands? And that's why it is understandable that if one or two of them associated with him, then they were sort of really thrown out of the community, and they had to continue to live with him and travel back with him, because they were not taken back into the country, into the community. Why I say that this must have been occurring in their mind, because Aitareya Aranyaka, to which this Shanti mantra belongs, is at least from the 6th or 7th century BC. Alexander came in the 3rd century BC. So what we are dealing with is extreme antiquity, very ancient times. So when we look at the Aranyaka sections, what we find is that the primary deity there is always Prāṇa. Prāṇa, which means the life force present within the human body, within all living beings, that life force. I have already had a long discussion of Prāṇa in the previous shloka, so I will not get into that discussion. But worshipping and meditating that Prāṇa within themselves was for them an intermediate step towards finding the quintessential truth within oneself, towards the final goal, which is noticing and coming across this most subtle principle within oneself, which is consciousness. Prāṇa is an intermediate step. It is a step between the gross and the subtle. The gross is when I look at myself, all that I see is my physical body. But then, when I notice something more subtle, that is where the journey inwards starts. That is why, even in yogic practices, if you look at Hatha Yoga, what is Hatha Yoga? Ha, Tha. I explained it a few days ago. Ha, Prāṇa, Tha, Apana. The union of Prāṇa and Apana is Hatha Yoga, which means the practice of pranayama. Central to the practice of Hatha Yoga is the practice of pranayama, because that is really the door. The practice of pranayama is really the door to the internal world. So for them, pranopasana was this intermediate step. It helped them to go beyond the multiplicity with one's awareness into the unity and oneness. So for the Upanishadic masters, if they lived in a community, in a country where at least different groups worshipped 33 different gods, for them Prāṇa was the single unifying essence of all those 33 gods that were being worshipped in this country. So it was really, they express in their meditation, tatra devaha sarve ekam bhavanti, that all the devas, all the radiant beings that are worshipped by people of different customs and different languages, all they become one and united in this life force that is palpating within me as Prāṇa, as this supreme life force. Isn't it interesting that one of the, historically, at least when you read Western history, one of the first prophets to speak of one God, one of the first prophet, I'm not now saying that the first one, but one of the first prophets historically to speak of one God is considered Zoroaster, because he had tremendous influence on the world west towards Persia. And interestingly, his word for that unified one God is Ahura Mazda. And Ahura is the same in Sanskrit as Asura. And it is derived from the word Asu, which means Prāṇa, the life force. So it is very interesting, and this has Vedic precedence, because even the Vedic masters, when they speak of various forms of divinities, they always say Ekam Sat, the existence, the presence is one, but the wise express it in different forms and different names. But the essence is always one. And what is that great essence? If you ask the most ancient Vedic masters, they precisely use the same word, Mahat Devanam Asuratvam Ekam. Amongst all the radiant beings, the one essence is the essence of Asura, is the essence of Prāṇa. So Prāṇa sort of really was a unifying deity of the meditative practitioners in which all diversity merged together. And this is where then the messages, such as, for example, the concluding message of the most ancient part of the Vedas, which is the message of concordance. And concordance, this English word concordance, is really the closest linguistically I can get to the words that have been used by the masters there. Samana hridayani vaha. Let your hearts be one, united. Let there be no division, so that you can yathavaha susahasati, so that you can coexist peacefully. This was the goal of these masters. And Prāṇa gave them that path, that opportunity to explore concordance, because con, Latin, sama is the same, is linguistically the same word as sam in Sanskrit, con, son, con in Latin, and cordance, cord. If you look at the word cord, which is like cardiac arrest, it in fact is related to the ancient word for heart. So, sama hridaya, which means to have the same heart. And that, the best way to express it in English is concordance. And that's why I really like this word, because it's really the quintessence of the message of these teachings. Concordance and coexistence. But coexistence can imply tolerance. I don't like the word tolerance. Because tolerance is you are tolerating somebody else's views. Fine, tolerating. Hindus are Muslim, tolerating Muslims. Muslims are tolerating Hindus. That's tolerance. We are not looking for tolerance. We are looking for concordance, to be deeply united in our hearts. That is when true coexistence can come. Not only so, for them, Prāṇa was a door which enabled them to lift their awareness from multiplicity, from diversity, into a unifying factor. That is how all the meditative practices around Prāṇa are just about this. And let me give you a few glimpses. For example, there is this common diversity between men, women, and the third gender. And today, I think we are living in a times when this is the major topic in world politics today. In India, it's a major topic of politics with all that is happening. And yet, the masters, these masters, what they say to Prāṇa, "O Prāṇa, can I refer to you as a woman? Or should I refer to you as a man? Or should I refer to you as one, as both? You reside in all of them. So either I cannot refer to you as any one of them, or I can refer to you as all of them. It doesn't matter how I refer to you, because my speech is conditioned." So again, on the level of Prāṇa, this diversity of men, women, and the third, the neuter gender, this diversity, which is a physical diversity, it is realistic on the level of the physical body, but the moment we go on the level of that life force, we realize that even this diversity vanishes. There is in fact a beautiful story about the discussion here, and I will tell you this story. It is the discussion that is known in the mystical teachings as the blank knowledge, bad knowledge. You know Paryanka. You must have heard the word Paryanka. Paryankasana. Paryankasana, in which the body becomes like, and whenever I hear this word Paryankasana, and when I do Paryankasana, straight away my mind goes to Paryanka Vidya. Paryanka Vidya is it's a beautiful meditative practice, and it all revolves around prana. The Paryanka, the bed, is prana. So when through the practice of pranayama and by meditating on prana, a person enters and becomes completely relaxed. Because remember, for yogis, prana and the mind, they are deeply interconnected. The mind is agitated, our breathing becomes agitated. Pacify your breathing, the mind becomes completely peaceful. Allow the breathing to rest, the mind will become completely restful. So the bed that the yogis were lying on was the bed of prana. So Paryanka is the bed of prana, and this is the wisdom that a yogin acquired when he lay down on the bed of prana. That knowledge is called Paryanka Vidya. And see how the story unfolds is that he comes across this beautiful bed. So we are using symbols in the story, but you have to grasp the essence of the story. Then, as he tries to climb on that bed and reclines, which means becomes completely relaxed, reclines and relaxes, he notices that his father is already lying there. A beautiful story. His father is already lying there, and the father welcomes him like a father who would welcome his child who tries to climb on the bed. And that father is no one but the first master of all the Vedic teachings. If you look at the last mantra, the 10th Shanti mantra, Yo Brahmanam Vidadhati Purvam, it's Brahma. That the first master, in all the Vedic traditions, the first master is Brahma, not Brahman, but Brahma, which is nothing but collective intelligence, not one person's intelligence, but intelligence collectively. That's all. In any case, so he meets his father on that bed, and his father asks him, who are you? Then to this, the meditator answers very boldly that you are myself. Whatever you are, that is what I am. This is how he answers very boldly. He answers his father that you are myself, and I am you. I am that what you are, that is what I am. This is how he answers. And the section is beautiful because the father keeps on asking questions and he has to answer. So the father doesn't really teach him anything, which is typical to many discussions in the Upanishads and the Aranyakas, but makes the student to answer questions. That's all. So just leading questions, like Socrates, just leading questions to which he has to answer. So then the discussion continues, and then he asks him, why do you refer to me as with feminine names? Then he says, because when you express yourself as speech, vāci is a feminine word. So I refer to you as feminine names. But then why do you refer to me by masculine names? Then he says, because prāṇa is a masculine word. And that's why I refer to you as masculine names. Then why do you refer to me as neuter names? He says, because manas, the mind, is a neuter term. And that's why I refer to you as neuter. The point is speech, life force, and the mind. These three are manifestations of the same. Speech is the externalmost manifestation, clearly visible to everybody. When I speak, everybody can hear and see what's going on in my head. So it's the clearest manifestation. A feminine word is used. Then there is the intermediate manifestation, prāṇa, somewhat manifest, somewhat unmanifest. You have to get close. If somebody falls unconscious and you want to see if that person is alive, you have to touch their chest to check whether they are breathing or not, or you have to hold your hands next to their nostrils to check whether they are breathing or not. So it is somehow manifest and somehow unmanifest. And then the mind is completely unmanifest. Only I can know what is right now all going on in my head. Nobody out of 7 billion people in this world have access to what is going on in here unless I allow them to have access through my speech. They can only access that much. Yet all these three are manifestations of the same consciousness. Sometimes, if you want to refer to the most clear manifestations, we use feminine words. Because language is limited. It has these three genders. Some languages just have 2 genders. They can only speak in terms of he and she. Other languages like Sanskrit have 3 genders. So then we use these 3 genders. But interestingly, the innermost manifestation, Brahman, is always used in neuter gender so that it remains neutral from both genders. So, the point once again that I was trying to make is that through such stories, an awareness that this higher principle should not get conditioned from our sexual identity. Within a male, female body, it is the same consciousness. As prāṇa, as I said, it is between speech and between the mind. It is on one side manifest, little bit manifest and little bit unmanifest. And when I start exploring this prāṇa, it gives me the opportunity to pull my awareness back into this region. That is what happens in the practice of pranayama, that our awareness is limited to this heart region where ultimately the innermost truth described in the Upanishads has to be found in the cavity of the heart. So prāṇa, as I feel it entering this region and then again leaving out, it really brings back my awareness, which is scattered in all the different directions, but really on a very practical level, it draws back my attention. If asana draws back my attention to different parts of the body, which would be the first step, then pranayama draws back my attention to this portion. And like this, then very simple techniques of meditation are given, such as a bija mantra, a seed mantra. And the seed mantra is very simple. The first letter of many alphabets, and also the first letter in Om, in fact. That is how slowly and slowly Om is given to a student. So the very first letter, A, is given. And he meditates on prāṇa with the help of this mantra, which is A. And he realizes that how, even in this mantra, this is not just an arbitrary mantra chosen from nowhere, but he realizes that all the 43 letters of Sanskrit alphabet, and that means of all alphabets, ultimately deep down at their origin are nothing but A. And then up to here, it is all A. Change the mouth a little bit, I, U, U, Ka. Hit a little bit here, it becomes Ka. Hit a little bit here, Pa. But it's all I, U, all the different letters. This realization that A is present, what comes from here is just that wind, and as it reaches the lowest part of the vocal cord, it is just A. And then as it reaches the higher regions, depending on where the wind hits, and as part of this meditative technique, Sanskrit language had developed a great science of proper pronunciation, exactly where they used to meditate on where the wind exactly hits in which part of, and that is how the Sanskrit alphabet has been systematized. That was called shiksha, education, proper pronunciation. That's why so much importance is given on properly pronouncing Sanskrit. So the realization that ultimately all these differently sounding letters are united in one letter, A, and that is the symbol of prana. In the same way, all these different manifestations, the faculty of seeing, the faculty of hearing, the faculty of touching, all these different faculties that we have, they are united within that life force. They are just manifestations of that one life force. So like this, this seems to be a very simple fact, but if it remains unnoticed in the beginning, it can become the cause of deadly conflicts and bloody wars in the name of religion. Whenever this simple fact that Maharshi Aitareya wants to teach to his meditation practitioner, that how all letters which seem so different from each other are united within one letter, A. And all the different faculties arising within my body are united in prana. When this realization occurs, then there will be no deadly conflict. There will be no conflict. We realize that we are just coming from different perspectives. That's all. And that is what the Vedic traditions have always been about. So it's a simple fact, but of profound importance, again, from the perspective of concordance and coexistence. Then he takes the technique even a step further. Simple techniques, we all can do it. He asks first to pronounce A very loudly so that everybody can hear for a long time. And then he asks his student to pronounce A so that only he can hear it and no one else can hear it. Then he says that the loud A which you pronounced was a symbol of your body, which is a unified whole, your physical body, which is a unified whole of all these different limbs, but as one entity. In the same way, now this slow, low A that you have pronounced is a symbol to your inner body, which is the subtle body, which consists of the 5 pranas, the 5 senses of perception, the 5 senses of action, the mind, intellect, ego, and memory. All of these are in the Upanishads very often just referred to by the word prana. This subtle body is only like the sound that you made, which was very low, and that's why only you could hear it, No one else could hear it. So from everyone else's perspective, it didn't exist because they couldn't hear it. But from your perspective, it exists because you can hear yourself pronouncing it lowly. So it exists. So simply, sometimes we have to understand that simply because something is not perceivable to our senses doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. In the same way, like your low R, which you pronounced, existed to you, you have no doubt to that, but it doesn't exist to others. Others can't hear it. So like this, step by step, Maharshi Aitareya leads the journey, the internal journey, into the innermost essence, which is the essence of even these four faculties, the essence of the mind, the essence of the intellect, the essence of the sense of I, this limited sense of I, and the essence of all our memories, which is what he refers to as consciousness, as prajnana, which is the supreme principle for him, very step by step, systematically. These are the practices of Aranyaka, and for him the ultimate goal is what he says in this mantra, the next mantra that we haven't pronounced yet, but āvir ma edhi, become manifest for me, become evident for me. Earlier he used the same word for this physical body. So like this physical body is clearly perceivable to me, I have no doubt in the existence of my physical body. In the same way, like my physical body is so clearly perceivable to me, may that essence, that subtlemost essence of my being, consciousness, be clearly perceivable to me. That is his goal. So he unfolds his journey through meditation on prana. Prana gives, focusing on prana, being attentive of prana, gives a practitioner of meditation to go step by step, deeper within himself. And this is the reason why all the Upanishads follow sections on meditations on prana. Most of the Upanishads, they follow. What we find in the Upanishads are the quintessential experiences of the masters who have meditated on prana. And so these great, beautiful sayings such as asatoma sadgamaya lead me from the non-existent to the untrue, to the untrue into the truth, from light into darkness, from death into immortality. These beautiful prayers that we hear so often being pronounced, being recited, they are all addressed to this divinity, to this inner divinity of prana, this life force of prana. So this is what we find. Such meditative practices are what we find in the Aranyaka sections. And the next mantra, when he says that my speech is established in my mind and my mind is established in my speech, these teachings have to be seen in that context. What does he mean? Today we pronounce Om. It is on our speech, but is our understanding established in our speech? Is our speech established in our understanding? We are parroting out mystical, beautiful mystical words. Oh, books are there, you can find them. I am that in the shelf lying, people read it. They start parroting out, I am that supreme truth. But does it come from experience? Is understanding attached to it? Whenever I think of these sections like Paryanka Vidya, then I think, am I even really worthy of pronouncing Om? I'm still on the level where I should rather focus on one letter, coming back to the very foundations and start building myself properly up from there. by coming back to and just meditating on that. So my speech has evolved. I'm reciting Om 3 times, but my understanding has not evolved with that. So when he says that let my speech be established in my mind and let my mind be established in my speech, every time we say something, then we should ask ourselves, is my understanding established in it? When I'm teaching yoga, am I just teaching it because my teachers have said it? Or does it have the strength of my experience, my understanding? Yoga demands understanding. Yoga demands experience. And anything that has not been experienced should be taken ultimately with a grain of, what's the expression? With a grain of salt. Yes. With a grain of salt. Always keep a little bit salt with you and take it with a grain of salt. Till we have actually experienced it, tested it on the level of our own experience. Till then, our ears are open, we are listening. Wonderful. Let everybody say what they are saying. Shravana, that is listening. Manana, critical analysis. What did he say? Does it make sense or doesn't? It doesn't make sense to me. What Siddhartha said today completely doesn't make sense to me. I rejected it. It sounds foolish to me. Welcome, perfect. I bow down to you. That's what I want. If whatever I have said has triggered some critical analysis, my purpose is solved. Not to persuade of what I said, but it should inspire some critical analysis, engagement with these ideas. And then comes nididhyasana. If something makes sense, what Patanjali says, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. What Guruji says, it makes sense. Sometimes for years things don't make sense. But then suddenly one day, it makes sense. Then when it makes sense, then work harder to experience it. That is nididhyasana. That is when it comes to the experiential self. And after that, you can throw away your scent. But before that, if you throw away your scent, then you will just become a blind follower. And a blind following is, at least in my understanding, you are most welcome to throw away this view of mine as well. But for me, a blind following doesn't lead far. Maybe sometimes in the beginning it is useful. In the beginning it's useful. Just have faith. Guruji is saying it, so it must be true. But initially, after some time, everything should be questioned and tested. It is only then that our understanding then gets established in our speech. This is what he is demanding. So, because he has declared the quintessential sentence, Prajnanam Brahma, that Prajnanam, consciousness, is Brahman, he doesn't want people wandering about, parroting out this quintessential sentence without understanding. But he wants them to say it with firm conviction, based in their own experience. Otherwise, this is not only useless, but it can become tremendously detrimental, harmful for the spiritual development of a person. So we'll come back. This was sort of a practical viewpoint, what it means. So we can pronounce Om, wonderful. On a level of speech, we have evolved to the level of Om. But on the level of our understanding, we know nothing about what O means, what A means, what U means, what Ma means, what the unification into Om means. We know nothing. I maybe know conceptually what it means because I've studied those Upanishads that discuss the symbolical significance of Om, but yet on a practical level, on an experiential level, even just meditating on that is where I find myself. On a practical level, on a very practical level. So, on the level of the mind, I maybe just have evolved to not to the level of Om, despite all the information that I have. Because when it comes to practice, yoga is a practical path. So, we'll come back to this discussion now, to this mantra in our next session, which will be, as usual, on Saturday. We will study this mantra, and with this background in our mind, a grand background which lies at just a few points I tried to make, so that the simple ideas that have been expressed in this Shanti mantra will make better sense to us, at least to me and whoever remains with me on Saturday.
Yes, for those who are not here anymore on Saturday,
Yes,
you can listen to all the talks on YouTube also,
they are
if you want to follow up.
Yes.
Those who are not here.
old ones, future ones,
Slides.
all are freely accessible.
I think there's maybe 56 of them now.
Yes,
There's
yes.
56 of them now.
We are, this is the 56th, I think the 55th or 56th
Something like
talk on, but it has been an incredible journey for me. For me it has been, because I've been pronouncing these Shanti mantras from the age of 6, 7. But the kind of understanding and insight that I have gained this time, I'm speaking here really as a student. That's just as a simple student. Just, I'm in the role that I have to sit in front of the mic and you are sitting in the back of the mic. We can change the role if you want, no problem. But it seems, so that's all. But otherwise, we are moving in the same boat. I'm a student here, a humble student here, and I hope to remain a humble student all my life in yoga. That would be the greatest achievement I have had. Any questions? Any observations? Anything that you think didn't make sense? Sounded foolish or stupid? Yes.
How to coexist with people that are different or have a different mind level or different interest in like family or
I think coexistence in family. I think understanding is the only key. The more we try to understand the other person, when we realize that how sometimes an individual is guided by their ignorance, by their fears, by their attachments, by their hatreds, and then can understand their hatreds and their fears and their ignorance, and then try to put yourself into their shoes. I have very little family to speak of from practical example. My family consists of my father and my mother, and my coexistence relies on every time saying yes. Yes. That is my family. My family, mainly in Rishikesh, the family that I deal with every day is my father and my mother. When she shouts at me in the classes, get out, I say, okay, I will work harder so that I don't have to go out
This works not shout at you.
I only shout at you
in the class.
And I all the time say, if he asks us, you decide.
do with my father? I say, okay. That's my sadhana. That's my practice. So if you would ask me from that much of personal experience, when a wave is coming, don't stand up in its face. Just bow down and let it pass over you. And then you can stand up. After it has passed, then you can stand up. That's for you to decide. Never to mess up.
I all the time remember that the dog and the monkey. My God. And they were fighting with each other, and somehow that monkey got the tail of the dog. And he wouldn't leave him, And it was so beautiful to see what they're going to do. I was watching them for a long time. And the dog really tried to go. And he tried, but the monkey wouldn't allow him. And he was so exhausted, the dog, and because he was so much afraid, yowling, doing, crying, shouting like a baby, like a small and this monkey, my God, he wouldn't care. He wouldn't do anything. He was just sitting there with both all the legs stretched out and holding his tail. And then the dog was so exhausted that he completely surrendered. He was almost like completely collapsing, And then the monkey left him. Then he left him, The moment he saw, oh God, my God, you just, whatever comes, why you resist, why you start fighting, just surrender completely and let it go, and the thing is over, That gave me such a teaching, and then the dog left, but very carefully, It was such a beautiful thing to see. This is what we have to learn,
But bowing down in front of my parents doesn't always mean that I always do what they say. So bowing down in front of the wave as it passes doesn't mean to get completely carried away by that wave. Ultimately, I do what I find to be correct, what I want to do. But, yes, the simile, the example, is in lack of resistance, but sticking at the same time with the truth. And particularly on the devotional path, one many times has to fight against one's closest family and closest friends. But that fight, if it is done in a peaceful way, that is what all the great devotional masters have done. And there they don't care, because they know that we are on the path of truth, we are on the correct path. So then it doesn't matter. Then it doesn't matter whether it is my father, whether it is my mother. So complete respect is there, but respect never means to blindly follow anyone. Maybe there are moments when my father, when my mother cannot see the situation, the problem at hand from the direct perspective that I have. And that's why their solution to the problem may not be the same. And I can see that sometimes, that okay, they are seeing it from their perspective. This is my problem. They are trying to find an answer from their perspective. It doesn't match what seems to me the correct solution, then I follow that. If I can convince myself that this is the greater truth than what is being seen by my parents or by my elders. So it's a fine balance between respect, between acknowledging them, acknowledging their views, and yet sticking to the truth. So Blind following? No. Never. Okay. Yes, there was another question. Yes. Yes.
So, when we speak of the life force, prana, and then we speak of universal consciousness, we speak of Paramatma, are we speaking about the same thing, Brahman?
Sorry?
Is it,
What was the question?
are we speaking
Yes. Brahman is often referred to as the prana of prana, the prana in prana. That is how pranasya prana, the prana of prana. Sometimes the word prana, mahaprana, the great prana, the universal prana, so many words are used. The word prana, when we were discussing it there in Prāṇaśchakshuh, I said that the word prana has been used in many different meanings, and that is one of the most confusing, because it's one of the most central aspects of yoga, and yet it has been used in so many different meanings, and scholars of yoga have not identified clearly with clear distinction the different meanings of the word prana, and that's why they get sometimes confused. Usually the section, the context decides in what meaning the word prana has been used. So yes, sometimes the word prana is also used for Brahman. Sometimes pranasya prana, the prana of prana, is used to refer to consciousness. The very prana of prana. Yes.
Where this thing comes from, like we say a blind following?
Yes.
Where does it originate? Where it comes from? Like
I think
the
it,
root cause.
I think it comes from a limited understanding of a truth, and then grasping that only as a truth, your own limited, and that happens particularly when we are too much focused on someone's words, because a word is always a glimpse into the infinite, but it is a finite glimpse into the infinite. And the more we get lost in words and fail to grasp the essence, we become like those blind people who were touching different parts of the elephant and describing the same elephant. This is a very ancient Vedic example used by the Buddha, Jaina masters. I don't know from how antiquity the Vedic masters speak of this. It's a very universal example. Like blind people, each one describes what they have touched, and it is their experience. But if you get lost in their words, then that would be blind following. Someone who sees, he can unify it. He can see that they are just describing different parts of the same truth. And in their words, they are just describing one aspect of the same truth. That's all. So when a person blindly follows that limited understanding which has been expressed by the masters in words, whenever that happens, whether it happens in the context of the Vedas, in the context of the Buddha's teachings, Jaina teachings, Christ's teachings, Muhammad teachings, Jewish prophets' teachings, whenever that happens, then to me it seems that that is blind following. But when you relate to it from an experiential level, that is when you go beyond the words. You see the greater truth, the ineffable truth, which is beyond the words. It is then a higher vision is cultivated. Then all those words make sense, and you also see how they were just a limited description. And no word can be perfect. So we should not even search. Sanskrit was the most perfect language from a yogic perspective. Great sages like Patanjali. And yet, here too, the same thing. Yado vāci nivartante. This truth is indescribable, ineffable in language ultimately. Yet it is an amazing tool, but we have to be aware of both facts. Blind following occurs when we follow the words to the letter too much, without critically analyzing, without testing it on the level of experience. That is when blind following takes place. Okay, so can we conclude, Mataji? here you are. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। My humble salutations to you. Thank you very much.